Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So our next speaker came all the way from Wollongong, almost next to Sydney in Australia, to tell you the story of Ferdinand the Bull. Oh, sorry. Nick is going to talk about how product analytics are helping Easy Agile focus their efforts on the right things to make their products more retentive and provide more value to their customers. Please welcome Nick on stage.
Okay, before we kick off, can I just get a show of hands? Who captures product analytics about your applications today? Oh, this is great. This is what, like half the audience. Okay, tell me who has looked at those product analytics in the last month? Not quite as many folks, but still good. That's encouraging. Okay. So this is a number that I was looking at in July last year. This is 40%, our monthly conversion rate for one of our products on cloud. And I thought it was pretty good. But we'll come back to this, and I'll just give you a bit of context. So in 2007, I started at Atlassian, and in 2009, when we acquired Greenhopper, I became the product manager. I've been on a bit of a journey since then. We built up a team over a couple of years at Atlassian. I moved to San Francisco and took on product marketing. We launched Jira Agile, and obviously it's gone on to become Jira Software. And while in San Francisco, I switched up and I joined Twitter. And at Twitter, I got working with the growth group. And the growth group at Twitter was about 100, 130 people, about 10 to 15 teams, depending on the period of time that we're looking at. And they were tasked with increasing the monthly active users on the core service, so the consumer side of the service, not the advertising, the revenue. In these two roles at Atlassian and at Twitter, I got a great understanding of product analytics, and I got an understanding of how to run experiments. And in fact, in my time at Twitter, I worked with the product and engineering leadership to put in place an experimentation framework. I wouldn't say it was altogether successful at Twitter, but it was a really interesting experience. And in 2015, when my family and I returned to Australia, I decided to kick off this business, Easy Agile, with a colleague of mine from Atlassian back in the day, Dave Elkin. And so we've been on this journey since early 2016, when Dave and his family came back to Australia. And we launched Easy Agile user story maps in March of 2016. We launched our road mapping product in August of that year. And if we look at December 2017, so 31st December 2017, we had 4 full-time team members. We had just over 700 customers globally. And today, here we are in September 2018. We've got over 1,300 customers, and we got 7 team members. One of them's a part-time. And if I look forward to where we'd like to be in 2019, I'd like to say that we have 2,000 customers around the globe, and probably that we're a team of 8. So there's this aspiration here to grow the business. And what we believe is that, I guess with 1,300 customers, we believe that we've found product market fit. Okay, so now it's a matter of how do we take a pretty decent solution that we know that customers are using and enjoying, and how do we grow that and scale that? And so earlier this year, we decided to run our first experiment at Easy Agile. We've been hustling for 2 years, really, to get the business off the ground, to grow the team, and we decided to turn our attention to an experiment. Now, experiments are aimed at finding new approaches, new avenues to grow the customer base, have a more effective product, delight the customers. And this was by no means the first experiment that Dave or I had run, because Dave had been running experiments with the HipChat team at Atlassian previously. And I'd obviously worked with the growth group at Twitter. But it was something altogether different. The sorts of experiments that we were running at Twitter was, how do you increase a 300 million user audience on a mobile phone into 305 or 310, whatever it is. And in our case, we were thinking about that conversion rate. We were thinking about that 40% conversion rate. And how could we improve our conversion rate? So the first thing for us in the way that we think about the experimentation framework at Easy Agile is we've got to have an idea of what success looks like. And for me personally, that means we've got to paint a really vivid picture. So I like to think about if we were super successful with this experiment, what would it look like in 6 or 12 months? What would those outcomes have looked like for us, for our customers, and for the business? And so we set a goal. And using that goal, we can then go and say, what are some ideas? What are some ideas that we could use to actually help us achieve that goal? And we can turn these into one or more hypotheses that we'd like to actually test, that we'd like to experiment with. And once we've got an idea of what success looks like, and we have one or more hypotheses on how to get there, we actually turn our attention to this framework of build, measure, learn. And so I'm sure you've heard of this framework. Eric Ries has talked at length about it over the years since his book, The Lean Startup. And it's a really quite simple approach. If you're in Martin's talk earlier, Martin gave some really interesting insight into design and when are you ready to actually build something. And I was reflecting on that at the time, and I was thinking we are probably, at Easy Agile, we're probably a little bit too quick to build perhaps, and maybe we could have done some more user research. But one of the reasons that we're quite quick to build is we think about this build, measure, learn. You know, if we're putting something into practice with our customers, it's not one and done. We're putting it in as an initial version to get feedback. And we want to use that feedback and iterate on that conversation with customers over time to continually improve what it looks like. And the only way to know whether you're improving things is obviously to measure it. So you can measure and learn from conversations with your customers. So if we go back to that number, that 40% number, we decided that what would be a really healthy conversion rate for us would be 50%. We'd like to try and get to a 50% conversion rate for our story mapping product in cloud by the end of the financial year, so by 31st of June or 1st of July. And that seemed like to us, that seemed like a bit of an audacious goal, like a pretty hairy thing that we wanted to go and set about and achieve. A pretty significant challenge. But we'd also had to think about some approaches that we could take to get there, and we thought that we could take one of these approaches and use it to boost our conversion rate. You know, one of the simplest approaches to perhaps boosting our conversion rate is to lower our prices. Let's just cut our prices in half. That'd probably increase our conversion rate. But it would have some pretty significant impact on the business and the business model that we've got. It would probably mean that we would not have the profitability that we have. We wouldn't be able to reinvest in the business. So while that might be something that's appropriate, it's probably not the right way to get us there. Perhaps we could send more emails, right? Maybe we send more emails in that drip feed and we do an email every day. But the reality is that the email addresses that we get are not our end users. We're a user-facing app, and so reaching out to the technical contacts is not really effective for us in terms of improving and encouraging more usage of the product. We want to get out to the end user that's actually there in the company using the app, hopefully on a day-to-day basis. And so finally we settled on improving the onboarding experience of our app. Now, up to this point in time, we had nothing onboarding-wise in our app. Hands up, who's familiar with the Getting Started button? You know, when you install an app, you have the Getting Started button? Okay, and hands up if you actually use that in your app today. Okay, what's that, about half of the audience? We hadn't even done that. So that's something that never even factored into us. We talked about it, but again, it was like that Getting Started app, the person that sees it is the administrator. And she's not necessarily the person that is going to use the app on a day-to-day basis. So our hypothesis coming out of this was really simple. We're going to show every user that comes into the story mapping product the key product features. We're going to show them the key product features, and our hypothesis was that showing them the key product features would lead them to understand the value, and that would improve the conversion rate. So to give you a sense, this is actually what our product looked like at the time. So this was actually earlier this year before we started any of this work, and this is our story map. And one thing that I want to point out is you'll see that in the top right, there's an ellipsis menu drop-down. And the first option in that drop-down is no swim lanes, sprint swim lanes, and version swim lanes. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but it's safe to say that being in that ellipsis drop-down, one, the ellipsis drop-down is not particularly discoverable, and two, what we actually did when you load the story map for the first time, regardless of what sort of agile board you were using, we would always select no swim lanes. So the first step for us was actually to go back to some of our product analytics. We had been capturing product analytics since day one at Easy Agile with our story mapping product. And so we had, at this point we had 2 years nearly, 2 years of data. And I suppose the historical wasn't quite so important because obviously the product had changed over time. But what we were looking at was the immediate usage of the product. And here in the lower left here with the pie chart, you'll actually see EAUSM event types. So our resident data guru, Satvik, he put together this dashboard. And the reason that he put together this dashboard was actually to give us a sense of what was happening today. Because how can we run an experiment and see if we have any impact if we don't have something to measure? So we looked at this pie chart, which shows us the usage of key features. So what are the key features that people were using in our product? And from that, we actually took that into the big chart that you see at the top, the line chart, which is showing the usage of those features, specifically for our evaluators. And so I'll get to how we actually differentiate that a little later, but really having this data alongside the marketplace data, so knowing whether it's an eval or a commercial license, was really useful for us because the behavior of a customer in their evaluation period can be entirely different to when they're using it on an ongoing basis. And I think one of the most important things for me when we were talking about this earlier this year was that we'd been capturing all this data for a long time, and here's a great example of where we were using that data to make an informed decision before we'd even written a line of code. So we didn't need to go out, write code, deploy anything to production. We just needed to go and interrogate the data that we already had. So looking at this data, we actually came up with something, as we were investigating all this data, that was probably more troubling than the conversion rate. And as we started to look at the experiment dashboard and we looked at it in conjunction with the marketplace reports, what we actually came back to was the monthly churn rate. And so the monthly churn rate for us, going back to July 2017, was sitting at 12%. And if you do the math on that, that basically means that over the course of a 12-month period, we've given up our entire cloud customer base. Everyone that comes in on day one, they've left us by the end of the year. So it's kind of quite a depressing thing, right? Here we are, we're thinking we're doing a really good job because we're making money, we're growing, et cetera, but this churn rate tells a totally different story. So we kind of thought that, look, while increasing the conversion rate is good, and increasing the conversion rate would certainly be healthy for us, the big problem that we needed to solve first and foremost was actually reducing this churn rate. And if you go back to the aspirations of our business and having a team of 8 and having 2,000 customers, if we didn't reduce this churn rate, we're never going to achieve those goals and those aspirations. And so we reset. We went back and we decided to reset our success. Like, what does success look like for us if we are winning on this? And we said, let's get that 12% churn rate down to 8%. So we want our monthly churn rate to be knocked in half. To be reduced by to 8%. One of the things that obviously I'm sure many of you are aware, the conversion rate and the churn rate can be misleading. We've seen it many, many times where a customer will convert and then they will churn in month 2. And we believe that that's a result of the fact that the person that asked for the product is not the person that gets the technical contact emails, and there's this disconnect in that customer, and they don't know, the technical contact doesn't know that they should unsubscribe and uninstall the app. Sally's investigated the app, she doesn't think it's valuable, but she hasn't let Bob know to uninstall it. And so obviously this is kind of like a really misleading thing. You can get your hopes up, but then your hopes are dashed a month later as that person just drops out of the system. So it's important when you think about increasing the conversion rate that you're not increasing at the same time the churn rate. You want to either maintain or reduce the churn rate while conversion rate goes up. So obviously we needed to fix the churn rate first. So the first thing that we did is we went back to this swim lane thing where we had, for a Scrum or a Kanban board, the first time that you load the story map, you actually are left on the no swim lanes option. Now, historically, if we go back to when we wrote the product, this hadn't actually changed since we wrote the product, right, and released it in March 2016. And what we had been thinking about initially with our hypothesis was, in the onboarding, we'll tell people the first thing to do is go and change it to sprint if you're a Scrum team, and go and change it to versions if you're a Kanban team. We know from our analytics that's what they do, and we thought that's what we'd teach them about in our onboarding experience. But looking at this data and looking at the experiment dashboard, we realized that that's a total fallacy, right? Like, going back to Martin's talk earlier, our solution is wrong. And so the way that, it was really a silly thing, actually, looking at this in hindsight, and I can't believe, as a product manager, I can't believe that I hadn't picked up on this and done something about it earlier. But suffice to say, what we actually did is we bumped that out of the ellipsis into its own menu item on the board, and if it was a Scrum board, we automatically set it to sprints. If it was a Kanban board, we automatically set it to versions. And it just meant that the thing that you were going to have to do immediately when you use the product was now done for you. And by the way, if you wanted to change it, it was really apparent. There's a version swim lane button, and what does every new user do? They click on every button, right? Like, I'm sure you know this. If you look at your analytics events, they go around, they click on everything to see what everything does. So there it was really easy for them to see what it was and switch it. Really simple stuff, but we needed to get this done and get this piece of work out there before we went on to the onboarding experience. And so fast forward a little bit, you'll actually see that version swim lanes in the top header. I guess this has got a slightly new UI because we'd moved to a new version of Atlas Kit. But it really made things a little bit more discoverable around the top right of the product there. Not to say that it was a big thing, but I think it certainly helped. It's one of those things that contributed, and it was a step in the right direction for us and for our customers. And so at this point in time, we went back to our analytics dashboard, and all of a sudden, one of these metrics, the swim lane change percentage, that a month or two earlier we thought was really important, now had next to no significance for us. We really didn't care, because for an evaluator, we're giving them the right thing first time. In fact, it should probably drop off to nothing. And so there's something there if it's not the right, if it's something there, they're still doing it, obviously, and I think they're doing it just to see what it does, but they don't actually need to change it. So again, the metrics that we started looking at around conversion rate, they shifted over time as we moved more to the churn rate and lowering the churn rate, and as we understood our problem space better. So this was definitely a journey that we were on to understand what the problem was and find a really good solution to it. So what we pushed forward with was finally this onboarding experience. And it's just technically the way that we actually let you know if you've done this or not is we store a property against the user. So if the user's gone through and walked through the onboarding, they'll have a property against that user. There was also some things around whether they were a very old customer. So as we were rolling this out, we decided to roll it out to a subset of the entire audience. And then after we were happy with it, we rolled it out to the whole audience, and we did that based on board and user properties and a few other bits and pieces. But essentially, this is it. Welcome to Easy Agile User Story Maps. And what we decided to do was instead of walking people through the features of the product, we decided to walk them through the practices of story mapping a little bit. So if you see this now, they get a little bit of an introduction. Epics, they form the customer journey on the story map. You sequence work into sprints or versions. So again, we're telling them what to do. And then there's this other little experiment that we ran at the end of it as well about a new feature. So it was really that simple, right? Like, it was a really super simple onboarding. There wasn't a lot to it. It wasn't targeted at the admin. It was targeted at the user. And any user in that instance that went along and clicked on the story map, that's what they'd see, and that's what they'd go through. And so if I come back to like this kind of nasty number that we had in July of 2017 at 12%, I'm pretty happy to say that by the end of July 2018, we'd halved that. So we'd started out thinking, we want to move conversion rate from 40% to 50%. We'd done this little investigation and journey over the course of a couple of months to actually discover that churn was the number that we wanted to change and improve first. And what we'd actually managed to do since the beginning of the year to July was actually go from a 12% to a 6% churn rate. So it could certainly get better, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot healthier than what it was. And I believe that the health of this is really important because this is something that will have a significant impact on the business over the coming 12 months, 18 months, 2 years' time. So it's really important that now that we're there, that we maintain that. So while we now seek to potentially improve our conversion rate, we want to improve the conversion rate while maintaining churn at 6% or ideally reducing churn further. So there's a couple of tools that we use to support our learning with respect to this product analytics and this journey that we were on. And the first piece was actually marketplace analysis. Can I just get a show of hands? Who here pulls in licenses and transactions into their own database today from Marketplace? Okay, not enough of you, but that's cool. Really the baseline for all of this was understanding our customers. We couldn't have got to the product analytics and the product insights if we didn't understand our customers. So about, I don't know when it was now, early 2016, one of the first things that we did was we started writing a little Node.js service. And this Node.js service actually polled early on in the piece when Jamie and Ralph, they turned on the API for Marketplace. It used the REST API, pulled down licenses and transactions. It went from that to actually enrich that license and transaction information and turn it into licenses, transactions, organizations, contacts, partners, add-ons, distribution. It captures a whole host of information from the marketplace. And the reason that enrichment of the data was really important was so that we could say, is this a small company or a large company? Like, how big's the opportunity? What's the conversion rate for cloud versus server? What's the user tier breakdown? So marketplace analysis is this tool that we've been using, and in fact, there's a number of other vendors that use it as well today. And they use it to pull in the data from Atlassian Marketplace REST API, and they enrich it so they've got a better understanding of their customer base. And that's kind of like the foundation for this piece. And the next one was product analytics. And so the way that for any of you that was in the session with Erica before, like, we're super aware of GDPR. And as a result, we built our own analytics service. So actually, Dave and I, in my time as the Greenhopper product manager back in 2010, 2011, we actually instrumented Google Analytics in our Rapid board so that as we were developing the new Rapid board, we were capturing the client events so that we could see what people were using in the Rapid boards as we were building it. Really, at the time, it was a really great idea. I thought it was pretty compelling, but obviously, history taught us that using Google Analytics and having a lot more data about people was ridiculous, and you just wouldn't do that today. And we chose not to use that as a solution at Easy Agile. And so we have a very small, thin Node.js service, and that just captures a bunch of JSON that gets sent down from the client every 5 seconds. So if there's no analytics event on the client in the story map, it doesn't send anything. If there is a swim lane change, if there's a quick create, if there's a story map rendered, all of that sort of information, no personally identifiable information, but all of that context around what the user's doing and the actual event is sent back to our analytics service. And to give you a bit of a sense, we're using Atlas Kit, React, apps are React, Redux, and so this middleware sends through every event that goes through React, and we capture that. Maybe not every event, but certainly many of them. I'm not entirely sure how many events we capture on a monthly basis now, but I believe it's on the order of 3 or 4 million. Yeah, so we've got about 9.5 million analytics events in the database currently, going back a little while. So being able to actually correlate the product analytics, so these events coming out of the customers, with the SEN is one of the most important things, because then we know, is this analytics event related to an evaluator, a customer, commercial, academic, like how do people use it and do they use it differently? So really important. And the final piece, I guess, of this aspect of learning, that build, measure, learn, and the learning, the tools that we use, is Metabase. And so Metabase is an open source solution. It's a Tableau. It's a BI tool, but it's really neat. And Tim Clipsham of Good Software Company, he brought it to our attention, and we've been using it ever since Tim brought it to our attention to actually dive into our customer data and our product data. And those dashboards that you saw earlier, that's the tool that they come from. Super easy to sift through data and filter it and actually understand what's going on and get insight. So go back to what Erica said before, and I wish I'd been able to update this with the quote from Erica at Atlassian. But essentially, like, everyone's been breaking the law, and many people are still breaking the law. And we have no desire to break the law, right? Like, we tried really hard to get on the right side of GDPR early. And I guess the easiest way for us to address this, because back in June, we actually had a really lengthy conversation with another vendor over here in Europe about our practices and how we were doing it, which led to this talk. And they essentially told us at the time that you can't capture product analytics. You cannot capture these analytics, it's illegal. And of course, our retort to that is, well, we're not capturing any personally identifiable information. We're capturing event data about the app, and that does not fall under GDPR. It's not on the wrong side of the law. So if you're not capturing product events today, I'd encourage you to look at how you can, but I'd remind you that to stay on the right side of the law, you really don't want to tie any of that stuff to personally identifiable information. So no email addresses, no names, no context around people, gender, any of that sort of stuff. So we don't capture any of that. We literally throw back a SEN, the support entitlement number, for the company's instance, and then the event data itself. And that's really all you need to capture to get a ton of value out of this. And so I think the key thing to remember is to experiment, right? Like this fella, Edison, he worked with a team of people to constantly hone and improve his craft. And as I understand it took them on the order of 3,000 tries to actually find an appropriate path forward to get an incandescent light bulb, right? So if you're not running experiments today, I'd encourage you not to get dissuaded if you don't have success early on. I think maybe this is low-hanging fruit, and we were super lucky. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I know from my experience at Twitter, like our success rate on experiments was little better than random walk, okay? What we did do, though, is we learned a ton from it. And just like this one particular experiment here, we learned a tremendous amount from that exercise. So first up, if nothing else, you're going to know how people are using the product, right? You're going to know if people are using the features that your team has shipped. One of the greatest examples of that is Quick Create, which we used last year. We had a whole dashboard for Quick Create to see that people started quick creating thousands of issues on the story map over the course of a 2-month period as they adopted and updated to the latest version. Really encouraging for myself and for the team. Second, what we saw is that actually having a user-focused onboarding that explained the value proposition and the practice, the story mapping practice, not the features, which is where we started, but the actual practice of story mapping itself, that turned out to have a really significant impact on our churn rate. I'm not even actually sure where our conversion rate is at the moment, but I think it did actually have an impact on the conversion rate as well, a positive impact. Another positive unintended consequence, actually, of the support analytics, of the product analytics, is from a support perspective. So we really quite often turn to the product analytics when we're trying to diagnose an issue that a customer's come to us with. They'll say, I can't see X, Y, Z. And we can look at the product analytics for that support entitlement number and immediately go, well, here's your problem. So it's cut our response time down dramatically, just having the product analytics and being able to use it in another part of the business. And finally, as a result of all of these changes, our customers raise less support requests. So our support contact rate, Seamus is here, you can talk to him about it this afternoon or tomorrow, but our support contact rate, since we introduced these changes, has also halved. It's dropped off a cliff, right? Like it's really important from a business perspective that our customers are self-servicing better, or they don't need to reach out to us at all. So, like, experimentation might seem daunting if you're a small vendor, if you've only got a small team, but we ourselves, when we embarked on this, we were not a big team, and in fact we were inspired to do this by a really small vendor that had a team of 3 that was already running experiments themselves. So it's not, while it might seem daunting, when you get into it, it's really not that challenging. So I think that you too should try and run some experiments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nick. So we still have some time for questions. I see some hands there.
Thanks, Nick. Great talk. A few questions. First of all, do you ask for the users or admins' consent to sell analytics? Do they even have that option to opt out?
Yeah, so admins can actually opt out. They can opt out by turning off a plugin module, but we don't ask for consent.
So by default, it's on?
It is on by default.
Okay.
Yep.
Second question, so when you remove personal identifiable data, do you still keep some hash of a user key so that different types of data tie together so you can understand that this is the same user?
Yeah, we don't actually keep a hash, but we use a UUID. So all of these events that come through, they come with a unique identifier. So that means that it's not tied to Igor, but it's tied to, Igor's Chrome browser, Safari, Firefox, whatever.
Okay. And lastly, in your example, how did you pick this improvement about the swim lanes? Why not something else?
Oh, the swim lanes came up actually because it was one of those things that we were looking at on the dashboard. We were going through we were thinking about what would we share in the onboarding. And in my mind, in the onboarding, I was like, well, one of the first features that I expect users to engage with is the swim lane. I expect them to change the swim lane. And then we looked at the analytics and we were like, well, no one really changes the swim lane, and that means that they're probably not getting the value out of it because they're not seeing the sequencing of work and that possibility. And then that, as we were looking at that analytics and talking about it, we really said, the way that we've got it today is just wrong. We need to bubble that up. That's a primary action, and I really don't think they use it that much. If we look at usage, the usage should be really low because now we've got much better defaults. And there's very likely many more of those sorts of things in our products, right? I go back to, one of the things that we do actually, we have an immediate evaluation program, and so we have a demonstration instance that users can log into, and we use a service called MouseFlow, and MouseFlow records the screen, right? Like, it actually records the browser window. And so for that reason, there's absolutely no way that you can embed it in your product. It's something that we just embed in our demo Jira instance that doesn't have any personally identifiable information. Demo sort of stuff. But we look at that and we watch what people do, and we kind of scratch our head. We're like, far out. This is super painful to watch. And things like that are really, really valuable for helping us think about, what's actually going on.
Okay, just one short question. Do you collect analytics data on a server platform as well, or in the cloud?
Server and cloud, we do, yeah.
Both.
And so we actually, we looked at the difference between the cloud and the server results, and when we were happy with what we saw in cloud, we actually made it available to all of our cloud customers, and then we also included that onboarding experience in a subsequent release of server. Yep.
Sorry, Nick, can you just clarify, do you collect analytics data on server customers?
Yes, we collect analytics on server customers.
Great talk. Question about the churn and conversion. How do you measure it? Do you use what Atlassian gives in the marketplace? reports, or do you have some smarter way of calculating the churn and conversion, which is especially difficult on server, where the decisions are delayed between the evaluations and actually, the purchases?
Yeah, these numbers that we're looking at here today are from the Atlassian reports. For cloud and for server, we have a different approach to actually measure that churn. And one of the things that we're doing for this financial year is we're actually measuring churn on a user tier basis. So if you look at the Atlassian reports, it's just across all user tiers. And we had another hypothesis was that the churn is higher at the lower user tiers. And in fact, what we have seen from our investigation is that churn is much higher at the 10 user tier. And if we look at churn on the unlimited user tier, there's no churn. So, we're trying to get a sense of that, but we do all of that ourselves across cloud and server in Metabase. Yeah.
Okay, we've got time for one more question.
My question is that did you make any measurement about the conversion rate after you introduced the getting started dialogue?
Sorry, Daniel.
So have you measured the conversion rate before and after you had the getting started dialogue?
We have.
And what were the numbers?
I don't know what they are today, but I know that a month or two back, the conversion rate, while the churn rate was this low, the conversion rate was 56%. So yes, the conversion rate did go up. I don't know what it was at the end of July though. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nick. Wonderful talk.